Now, this is a piece on Forbes.com, right? And this is dated, this is updated last April. I thought it was interesting, and it made me think. It brought me to the main subject of tonight's show. Let me see what I do. Well, all right. Let me see. I'm going to read it to you anyway. All right. So, where'd it go? All right. So the title of the article on Forbes.com, dated April 14, 2022, a couple years old. Women's scholarships and awards eliminated to be fair to men. Right? This made me, this website made me remove my ad blocker. So getting all kinds of crap on the screen I don't want. I apologize to you for that, but I will read nonetheless. Women's scholarships, leadership programs, awards, and even gym hours are being eliminated or canceled by universities because they discriminate against men. Complaints are being filed with the Department of Education about programs and funding for women at universities across the country, and the DOE is taking action. One of the latest targets is the Marilyn C. Davis Scholarship at the University of California, Santa Cruz. To be eligible for the Davis Scholarship, an applicant must be a mother returning to receive education in the sciences at UCSC. Ursat Pegos, I know I butchered that, so I ain't even gonna try. I apologize. Is an ex-USC student now working in Turkey, filed a complaint against UCSC with the Department of Education. He believes that the scholarship is sexist and discriminatory because the award is not open to men. Last week, he received confirmation that the DOE will investigate, and a spokesperson from the university says they're aware of the investigation and are cooperating. The UCSC scholarship is just one example of the hundreds of women's scholarships and awards currently under scrutiny for Title IX violations. Pegos has been involved in filing 21 other similar complaints. Now, I'm going to stop there for a second. The reason I'm bringing this up, right, I'm just going to tell you out front, the reason I'm bringing this up is in our, when you talk about Black issues, right, if you go back to 2020, and on this channel, we've been talking about this regularly. Right? We started to really see it become something completely blatant in 2020, right? Whether it was support for entrepreneurs, whether it was grants, scholarships, whether it was handout checks to families, there has been an overwhelming push to bring resources to women, and particularly in a Black context, Black women. Now, Black men, for the most part, don't even seem to expect it. This is how used to not receiving attention politically Black men are. It doesn't bother us. We don't even expect it. But when you start to see companies like MasterCard, Visa, when you started to see Goldman Sachs putting $10 billion toward, Black women and bolstering their position in the economy, we started to see resources and even PPP loans in 2020, right? The only men that I had come on this channel talking about how they got them were men who had to use women as the face of their company to get some type of support. The idea being that Black men are not only last, if there's any energy brought toward us at all, in terms of policy and resources, but we don't even expect it. That's how used to not getting it we are. But the fixation on providing women those resources has been fairly consistent. And this is the crux of the question that I want to ask in regard to a Kamala Harris presidency. I'm indifferent about the conversations about how Black she is. We're going to go back and forth. Is Judge Joan Brown right? And the father is really just Irish and Indian? Or is everybody else claiming that she was raised in Oakland and the father is Black Jamaican? And we can go back and forth on all of that. We can go back and forth on, how many people she may have, jumped in bed with to get in her position. We can do all of that. My question is always going to come around the policy. I don't care if you are the Blackest person from the middle of Detroit, Chicago, Alabama, Oakland. I don't care how Black you are. If you're not going to produce policy that benefits Black males, you've already lost my vote. That's where I come from with it. And truthfully speaking, if she didn't have a Black drop of blood in her, but she was willing to put forth policy that benefited Black males, you have my attention. This is why I'm indifferent to personalities running for office. My question is, what are the policies that are going to benefit Black males? And can you articulate them? Can you be held accountable to them once you get into office? Those are the questions I'm more interested in. The reason I bring this up with Kamala is if she is as she is presenting herself, because it's politically useful for her to do so, right? To present herself as part of the Boule Gynocracy. And we see this with the academic aristocracy. We see it with the fraternal and sororal orders and whatnot. If all of that is how she actually is, then maybe if we look to how women in those positions have been able to benefit from resources, if we look at their behavior, might that be a window into what a Harris presidency would look like? When we talk about the resources extended to Black women over just the last 4 years, how many of those women actually stopped and said, you know what? We're not going to go forward until our men get something too. We're not just a collection of individuals. We're families, we're communities, we're getting resources extended to Black women. But Black male homelessness rates have always been through the roof, and that was before the pandemic. Black men, in some statistics, we constituted, the majority of homeless men in America. Some even suggested half of America's homeless were Black, and overwhelmingly male. Overwhelmingly male. We don't talk about that. Not only do Black men typically deal with unemployment to far greater degrees than any other demographic in our community, let alone in the country, but we deal with homelessness to a greater degree. These are abject, impoverished positions where you are busted and on your ass. How many of those resources were thought about in relation to families? How many of them were targeted? How many mothers who were benefiting from these resources said, you know what? I have a son. I have multiple sons. Some of these resources should be earmarked for them. They're being mislabeled in schools starting in before they even reach the 3rd grade. They're being pushed out. They don't even get a chance. Over 90% of the teachers they run across in elementary school are female, even though there's data to suggest that males are inspired by male teachers and females are inspired by female teachers. But what happens when the majority of males don't have any male teachers? And they're being graded lower by female teachers. But we're not going to suggest that there may be any problem with that. We're just going to immediately assume it's just because they're poor students or they don't learn well, whatever the stereotypes are. How many mothers receiving resources actually said, you know what, my sons need something earmarked for them? My husbands, my brothers, my uncles, my business partners, women who were in position to receive, how many of them actually stepped back and said, these need to be extended on a communal basis because the community is suffering from a lack of inherited wealth and thus less capital to start businesses. So yes, more Black men have businesses than Black women. But are we going to talk about the quality of those businesses? We're going to talk about how much inherited wealth, how much wealth is involved in providing capital to start these businesses. Could Black men have used those resources? And what would have taken place if Black men would have received $10 billion allotments like from Goldman Sachs, but didn't say anything about the needs of Black women? How would that have been received? Well, again, just like I'm saying with Kamala, sometimes looking at the past actions of a larger situation might give you an indication, right? So let's go back to Obama's program, right? My Brother's Keeper, which wasn't even targeted for Black men. It was targeted for young men of color. Let's be clear. Young men of color. It was labeled as something just for Black males. I was pissed that it wasn't for Black males, but all right, we'll play the men of color game. What happened to it? Did women take offense that young men benefiting or who may have benefited, or men in general who were looking on, trying to understand what this program might be? Did they take offense that the program was not opened up to women? You damn right they did. You're damn right they did. And they tore it down from the inside before many of us even had a chance to find out what the hell it was. Tore it down. Had a petition going nationwide to tear it down, even though there was already a White House Council for Women and Girls. To add an addendum for girls of color, you could apply that same energy to adding that addendum to it. But instead of adding an addendum that would have expanded the White House Council for Women and Girls and provided some type of opportunity for them, no. Instead, they smashed My Brother's Keeper program. But when Black women start getting resources and grants and scholarships, and it's funny because I've asked Black men who tell me, nah, doc, you're just, you're being sexist. Who broke your heart? What is it? Who hurt you? You're not thinking about this clearly. There are plenty of scholarships for Black males. I asked men, show me. Some of them showed me scholarships that have been on the books since 1987, but have been defunded and defunct for years. They're just listed on some old website somewhere. Some show me scholarships that are in the planning stages, and that was 4 years ago. And the funny part about it is those planning stages never ended. Whether they were old, outdated, defunct scholarships and grants, or whether they were planned ones that never reached the ground, very few people could point to any type of scholarship or grant that was targeted at Black males. And even some of the ones they said they found that looked like they were legitimate, when you looked into them, they weren't for Black males. They were for anybody who applied. Now, nobody's arguing that there aren't scholarships and grants that Black males can apply to. We're arguing that there are not resources targeted and earmarked specifically for Black males, even though there's plenty of data from employment to entrepreneurship to homelessness that would suggest that Black males could use them across age, across class, across occupation. There's plenty of data to suggest that this might be useful, not only improving the quality of life for Black males, but also for Black families. So when we see these resources extended to Black women, particularly this Boule Gynocracy that we see, usually they're in the background, but with Kamala, they're coming out because this is their opportunity to get a woman in the highest office. So they're out. We're seeing sorority colors all over the place. They're out like gangbanging, right? How many of the resources have been extended to Black males when there was opportunity? When Black women were earmarked for those resources, how many of them said, you know what, we need to share these with our brothers? Yeah, I'm not saying this out of contempt. I'm not angry. I'm way past that. I'm clear. People's motivations are clear. It's very simple. If I say I love you, but you're starving, and I'm going to sit down and eat a plate of food right next to you, but I'm going to offer you none when I know you're starving, do I love you? I don't give a fuck if you say you do or not. If you're not helping me, you don't. Right? You don't. We've seen these resources extended time and time again in one area, in another area, in another area, and never once have we heard Black women as a collective get together and say, you know what? We have sons, we have brothers, we have husbands, we have fathers, grandsons. We need to share these resources to build. And by extension, did we ever say, if Kamala gets into office, Black women are clear on what they want her to do to uplift their position? Was there anything extended to Black males on behalf of that? Shout out to Builder's Table. He says, money for the plate, supporting brothers in media. Old Professor. Appreciate that, man. How you doing? Okay. These are the questions I'm asking. I'm going to go back to this because I do want to finish it, but I just want to put those kind of things on the table. And again, I'm sorry about the ads. I can't freaking get rid of them, but hopefully that's all right. So let's go through. Mark Perry, an emeritus professor at the University of Michigan's Flint campus and a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, has filed a whopping 410 Title IX complaints against universities that offer programs or awards for women, but not men. Perry says he was first inspired to take action when his university was offering several awards targeting female faculty. He complained internally, and the university modified the awards to be open to all faculty. Now, this is tricky. I've seen this at multiple universities. They will offer things to all faculty, but if the award committee that makes a decision on who gets the awards is comprised of whatever the demographic used to be targeted for, in this case, women, guess who will continue to win those awards more often than not? And when you try to complain, what they'll show you is the letter of the policies and the verbiage that has been changed, so it's no longer female focused. And so they can actually say, look, we complied. Complaint was filed. We complied with the complaint. We removed all the verbiage about women, and now the scholarship is open to everybody. It just so happens that only women got the award. It'll be a combination of men didn't apply to, well, the women's applications were just better. But then you look at the decision-making committee. I've seen these things function. It's definitely a game. It's the game where they move the shells around or the cards around, and you have to pick the one that you think is the card. It's a shell game. It's definitely a shell game because people are not trying to give these resources up lightly. Not white women, not Black women. Obviously, the Black Academy is a minute fraction of the academy, but when you get into the academy, you find out that the overwhelming majority of it, particularly when you're talking about the Black, section of the academy, is female. When you talk about hiring committees, when you talk about scholarship committees, decision-making bodies, mostly women. Hell, I've watched in the last 10 years my own field, Africana Studies. You go to the conferences like the National Council for Black Studies. It's mostly female. Any day now, I'm waiting for them to change the name of the organization. But it wouldn't make a difference to the people that are going, because as far as they're concerned, they treat it as a primarily Black female organization in the first place. I watched it happen. I've been going to that conference since 94, 95, all the way up to now. I've watched it happen. Like a game of chess. Fewer and fewer males. More women taking over committees. Even the programs where you go to the conference and you listen to presentations, there'll be 2 or 3 on men, and barely anybody will show. There'll be over a dozen on women. Packed. They'll be doing presentations on women performing drum dances. It doesn't fucking matter. It's primarily women. This is what they're talking about in this article, but they're referring to the academy as a whole. But I'm saying I've seen it happen in microcosms in terms of the Black Academy as well. Shout out to Greg. Appreciate the cash app. So let's continue here. He complained internally, and the university modified the awards to be open to all faculty. Shortly after that, in 2016, he filed a complaint about a women's lounge at Michigan State. The lounge was subsequently repurposed. Since then, he has filed hundreds more complaints and has become the go-to guy for others who want to report Title IX infractions anonymously. Now, this is interesting because I've had this happen too. When you become outspoken about something that most people are terrified to speak of, instead of joining you, holding hands with you and articulating their concerns, their legitimate concerns from their own experiences, what they'll do is they'll whisper, they'll email you, they'll text you, sometimes even anonymously, and say, yeah, this is what's happening. You go fight that fight. You fight it for me. But I stand with you. And if some shit comes your way where you're accosted and people are trying to attack you because of your outspokenness, a lot of those brothers will not stand up with you. Whether you succeed or fail, they won't stand with you. So when they talk about here how he became the go-to guy for Title IX infractions, it's funny. You notice they didn't say they joined him. That he became the go-to guy so that they could report anonymously. He was the face of it. And this is something we do all the time, as opposed to actually supporting each other and standing shoulder to shoulder. There are very few Black academics I've run across that can't tell me they haven't had the same experiences I have. I have far too many of them that reach out to me on an annual basis to tell me their complaints, and they're the same experiences. Sometimes from the most feminist guy you done met. You never suspect him to say it, but he'll tell you behind closed doors. Publicly, different question. Anyway, although he is still waiting to hear back from the Department of Education on the majority of his complaints, he has already had success in shuttering programs, scholarships, and awards for women at the universities throughout the country. To garner support for their efforts, both Pegos and Perry point to the fact that it's men, not women, who are now underrepresented in universities. Women in the United States have earned more bachelor degrees than men every year since the mid-1980s. Last fall, women made up 59.2% of all those enrolled in a college or university, and men made up only 40.8%. Now, I think many of us also agree in this circle of the internet that this also has to do with the return on investment. Right? So not only the cost of school, but measuring that against the return of investment after graduation, school loans. You have men that are making practical decisions about going into other fields that, create less debt. But let's not also pretend that it's not because, the resources that are extended aren't blocked from men, particularly Black men. That's part of the equation, because your analysis on return on investment might be different if resources were extended to you as they are to others. Let's continue. Women are also outperforming their male peers, earning high GPAs in high school and college, even in male-dominated STEM fields. Now, Pegos and Perry argue that efforts to help women in college are no longer necessary and are unfair to men. Both say they've received mostly positive feedback regarding their efforts. Regardless of whether you agree with these initiatives, they're apparently illegal under Title IX. Title IX protects people from discrimination based on sex and education programs or activities. that receive federal financial assistance and that include almost all colleges and universities in the U.S. Keep in mind, the Black male political agenda, we not only talk about Title IX, we talk about Title IV. We talk about having these reworded, reframed, specifically because of their impact on men and Black men in particular. This June, it'll be 50 years since Title IX was enacted, primarily to protect women and women's programs in universities. Sexual harassment and assault cases at universities are covered under Title IX. And the law is also credited with a huge increase in participation and funding for women's sports. Now, the law is being used by men seeking equality for the same reasons that universities can't offer sports to men only. They can't offer awards solely to women. There you go. I'm going to put the link in the chat. So if you'd like to come up, come on up. But I bring this up because I'm showing you how these programs, these resources are being called into question, but only by individuals and small groups of people who are willing and courageous enough to raise the question publicly, let alone take it to court, right? How many women, particularly Black women, have we seen receive these resources and turn around and try to find ways to extend them on the basis of communal love, right? On the basis of us being Black as a community. Clearly, if one demographic gets resources and the other doesn't, does that benefit a community if that's what indeed we're supposed to be? If we're a community, tell me, how does that work? If those resources aren't shared. And if the women that Kamala is linking with do not have a history of overtly sharing resources with the Black men that they're trying to get votes from now, would that happen differently if Kamala was elected to the highest office in the land?